Welcome to the Immunity Community 2020, where our focus is to provide physical, mental, spiritual info and positive vibes to help you endure and adapt. We'll be bringing you experts to provide strategies to handle stress and boost your immunity. Welcome, everybody, to the Immunity Community 2020. I am taking a seat for this interview. With me again is the lovely Olga Bloch, who is I would say just a wizard in therapy, or sorceress, or I don't know.
I'll take it all. How about that?
Okay, that works. But just someone, a dear friend and colleague, and someone that I definitely lean on to, as she likes to call it. Did you say shuck and jive, or what did you say?
Yeah.
So that we can shoot game and more therapy that I study. I'm always texting Olga and asking her all these things about receptive, effective capacity and acceptance and effective tolerance. And it's usually at 6 a.m. when I'm reading and she's still asleep. So we had already talked previously, and really what we wanted to focus on today were two different things. One was, well, really the general topic of trauma and how this coronavirus and quarantine and everything that's going on is, in effect, a traumatic experience for us as individuals. And also, really, what we wanted to focus on today were two aspects of that. How does this trauma play out in relationships? Mm-hmm. And then also, how does this trauma play out in, not necessarily on the effect it's having on businesses right now, but what's going to happen, how are businesses going to deal with employees coming off employment that were traumatized? And us as business owners also have been traumatized. Mm-hmm. So, it seems that to me, mental health is one of the most important things for us to focus on right now, because people are like, our whole society is shifting, and it's not just the things that people are doing, it's their entire beingness. Right. Like when we first met, I would ask you a question and finish your sentence for you. So I've evolved tremendously, and now I'm like taking this time to slow down and be more. So I'm hoping that and I'm going through ups and downs emotionally. I lashed out on my son yesterday and we had a fight, and it was just and I have to look inside myself as to like where was I stressing, not like what did he do to me. It's like what was I not willing to face that I had to blast out and discharge on him. So we can talk about that later. But so if you can, let's start with relationships.
Mm-hmm. Well, so first I'd like to thank you for having me on again, right? It's my pleasure to come back. And I just love our conversations, and I hope that what we share today will be helpful to others as well, especially because you're providing such a tremendous resource to the community as a way to help them understand and get a greater just clarity in terms of maybe what we're going through, and to be able to put words into it. So I'm really appreciative and grateful to be invited back. In terms of trauma, a little bit of the continuation of the conversation that we've had previously, I categorize trauma as having two components, which is something that our nervous system experiences as something that is beyond what we can bear and what we can tolerate. And what actually creates the traumatic life experience is having to deal with this by yourself. And so the feeling of being alone becomes this underbelly of holding the trauma, because we either cannot put it into words, or we don't recognize it, or we don't really understand what's happening, or simply because maybe of some previous trauma history. So it's not necessarily that this pandemic is causing a trauma to everyone, but it's how we choose to deal with it and how much we can see the impact that it's causing on us that's going to determine the level of trauma that gets affected by each individual. And so our conversation today is about shedding some light in terms of not only ways to take care of yourself, but ways to seek relationships and way to seek comfort with people rather than seeking whether it be habits or behaviors that are about numbing or
Mm.
dissociating or disconnecting or pushing feelings aside. It's much more about creating safety networks that can allow you to just vent or talk about the struggles that you're having or the things that you're scared of or things that perhaps you didn't notice or things that you try to push aside, right? Like we all have these feelings that are happening simultaneously as we're living our lives. And many of us are really good at like shooing it away. And as we engage in this shooing away process, it's a kind of like a pressure cooker that gets built underneath, and eventually something happens that we explode. We either lose our temper with our children, or we lose our temper with our spouses, or we become frozen. We don't have the motivation to do what we need to do. We don't care if our house is dirty. We don't care if we have work to do or we have to answer emails. There's like this feeling of being despondent and paralyzed that most of the time elicits behaviors that are about, excessive TV watching, overeating, constantly on your phone, right? Like ways to avoid actually being with these feelings that are communicating something to us. So relationships actually become one of two things. They can be a tremendous resource to help you self-regulate and feel better and be more engaged, or they can actually be a greater source of stress. Because if you're not feeling heard, or if you have a spouse or a child that is very demanding or that is rigid or that is inflexible, then it becomes really much harder to be able to not only communicate what you're going through, but to even identify it. Because when it's inside our heads, it's much harder for us to gain an understanding of what we're talking about. So it's only when we begin to put it into words that we're able to actually sort out some of our internal mechanisms and our internal world and what our needs are as a way to get the support that we need. So I know I just talked a lot, so let me
That was
check in with you.
awesome. I'm like, and it didn't go over my head. It's just all in here. So like what I take out of that is that relationships can be a source of comfort.
Mhm.
They can also be a source of discomfort.
Yeah.
And some of the ways that we avoid what we're feeling on the inside are things like, at least like for me, like alcohol or drugs. Like those are ways that I have avoided feeling on the inside. I'm speaking from, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but or the excessive TV watching or constantly on the phone. So how do we recognize the signs on the inside? At least I'll just speak from my perspective. Whoever's listening, yes,
Live. How about that?
so cool, so cool. Thank you. Just send me the Venmo, the invoice later. So from the perspective of like recognizing, okay, here's like, it's easy. Like when a relationship provides comfort for me, I want to call, I want to be there, I want to share, I feel open. But when a relationship doesn't feel comfort, there's something on the inside. Like what are some good tools to steer ourselves in the right direction, and whether it's finding comfort in the relationship or other healthy means of adapting and finding that comfort?
Right. So that is a great question. And what you shared actually is like a fundamental emotional mechanism that we have, which is we will gravitate towards those things that we feel like we are competent at. So if our relationships are not fluid, they don't meet our needs, or we have a hard time being heard, we're not going to have the tendency to gravitate towards something that is going to create more difficulties or more stress, right? So in terms of what can someone do, the first piece is to be able to identify, or at least to begin to identify your internal world. That we live in these two worlds all the time. We live in an external world and we live in an internal world. And it's really easy for us to get lost in the external world because that's a world that we can see. So, our jobs, our responsibilities, our kids, our families, we can focus on that because that's what draws our attention. But the internal world is just as important, if not more important, that merits our attention. And an easy way to recognize how your internal world is doing is imagine that there's like a window, right? And this window is called your window of tolerance. And this window of tolerance is the place where we can think and feel at the same time. And I'm even going to add an extra thing, which is not only think and feel, but also be able to observe ourselves. Our capacity to observe ourselves is one of the key components that really bodes for healthy emotional mental health, or to a balanced mental health would be a better way of saying it. So inside this window of tolerance, we can have our feelings, we can observe our feelings, and then we can think about what are choices that can either meet our needs or soothe those feelings. We are engaged with ourselves and with the external world at the same time when we're inside that window of tolerance. Now, if we go outside this window of tolerance, there's two places. The top part of this window of tolerance is when we are so anxious all the time that everything has this gripping feeling. Everything feels urgent. There's a lack of flexibility. There's a quick temperedness. There is lack of curiosity. There's usually a lot of like emotional isolation in terms of this feeling of like I have to do it all myself, or it all falls on my shoulders, or I'm the only person who can do this. So there's a rigidity and an urgency when you're outside of your window of tolerance on the top part of it. The bottom part of it is completely the opposite, which is feeling depressed, flat, no energy, no interest. There is also isolation, but the isolation is more as like a protection, like leave me alone. Usually there's a lot of avoidance. I don't want to answer the phone. I don't want to engage with people. I don't care, right? Like this is usually when people are like, I have zero fucks to give, is when you're down in that part of your window of tolerance. And then oftentimes what happens is people will live for an extended period of time on the top part, and then they get burnt out, and then they drop down to the bottom part in terms of like, I can't do this anymore. And that place on the bottom becomes a place where people refuel, right? Like depression becomes a place where people hide as a way to kind of regain their energy. And then once their gas tank gets filled up again, they pop back up to the top part of the window. And it becomes this cycle of what is called an anxiety-induced depression, right? So it's a very it's a very seductive cycle, because people who are outside of their window of tolerance on the anxious part can actually be quite productive and can accomplish a lot. The part is that it's not sustainable.
And it
Right?
seems that these are like on opposite ends
Yes.
of that window of tolerance.
Yes.
Can you give us some insight on how to be a better? Because what I'm pulling out of that was like self-observation is a very important aspect that, or a very important tool that we can gain, and or awareness. Like we actually are the awareness behind our emotions and our thoughts and action, and are at choice whether to listen to the thoughts that come up, or we are at choice to respond to our emotions versus react to them.
Before even the choice is about recognizing it. I can share from my own personal experience that before I learned this, I was always on the top end of that window. And that's where I functioned. And when I learned this, I remember very vividly the day I learned about this window of tolerance. I'm like, there is such a place that I can live that I don't have to feel like there's this tightness in my throat or my chest all the time, or that I'm stuck in traffic and I got to go get my kids at school. Like I can actually live in a place that's not like that. I thought I thought that way of being was normal. Like I never knew that there was a different way that I could interact with myself in my life that was not at that like 95 miles an hour kind of speed.
So for those of us who are stuck in that space,
right.
I'm recovering from that as well. I'm a recovering self-abandoning, super anxious person. What are the signs in the body? Like, what is there certain things that perhaps like, because some of us are not even aware that these things, that we actually can have a choice to, like, we're at choice about being anxious or being depressed or being happy, whatever that is. Are there physical signs in one's body, or, you know, because I want to hear from you, the therapist. I don't even need to quote it because you are a therapist. Sorry.
No worries. Yes, so there's a lot of signs that your body is telling you that something doesn't feel right. Um, and so the signs is usually like constriction of breathing.
Okay.
There's tightness either in your throat or your chest. Usually back pain, headaches are very common. Um, and this is your body's way of saying this feels like it's too much. But there's also emotional ways of saying that this is too much, like quick temperedness. I know for myself that when my voice gets really tight, I'm already getting to my limit. And it's not necessarily the words I say, but it's like my words are like really piercing. Like the person that I'm speaking to really needs to hear what I'm saying, or else something bad is going to happen, right? Like that's my warning, as if the other person is responsible for helping me feel better.
So
right?
if you trained yourself enough to be slow enough in the internal world to recognize when these things are happening, and
Absolutely. Not only have I learned how to notice, but I can also, another thing, right? It's not necessarily about achieving perfection, right? Because there are times that I'm going to lose my temper, or that I'm going to get angry, or that I'm going to go outside my window of tolerance. The object is to have flexibility, right? Like a volume button.
yeah,
You go super high, you actually know how to turn the volume button lower, right? And how to actually get yourself in a place where you can come back inside yourself, right? And coming back inside yourself are these tools that you're asking about. And it does have to do with, one, taking some time for yourself, two, identifying what is the need that is longing to be met. There is something underneath this anxiety that is longing to be witnessed, that is longing to be felt, that is longing to maybe even be put words into it, right? Like what you and I are talking about are things that happen at a subconscious level.
yeah.
We're not necessarily aware of it. And so the more we practice the capacity to observe ourselves, whether it be before we lose our temper or after, it doesn't matter, because the key to every relationship is the repair, right? Like we oftentimes focus on the disagreement, on the disconnect. Oh my God, there's so many disconnects with this person or with my child. I'm a horrible mother. My child is a horrible child, right? Like all the ruptures is usually what takes the focus. And what I would like to encourage people to focus on, instead of focusing on the rupture, focus on the repair. How to actually reconnect, and how to actually come back inside yourself and identify what is it that you need, what is it that would have made the situation better, how could you have done this in a different way, and can we in a relationship actually try to do this again, right? So if it's okay for me to use the thing that happened with your son, whatever happened with your son, right, you can always go back today and say, look, I can recognize now that I'm back inside my window of tolerance, that for me, what was really hard was X, Y, and Z, right? And I need X, Y, and Z. And I would really appreciate if we could do whatever, right? Like, so you're actually not only talking about what you need, but you're also modeling for your child your own vulnerability.
To learn that same
For them.
thing.
And
Yes.
it's safe for them to share their vulnerabilities with you,
So
right?
cool.
So that neurobiologically, we need that as human beings so we can actually learn how to have relationships, because our brains are wired for mirror neurons, and the mirror neurons will pick up things that our words are not saying, but our affect is communicating it, our tone of voice is communicating it, our willingness to want to make it better.
This is not just, I'm so excited because this is like, and I'm not like, you know, but it's like this stuff, this is not just evolutionary, it's revolutionary, because I grew up not being able to express myself from like wanting to cry, or, you know, because boys don't cry, suck it up, or like expressing anger. For me, it was just hyperactive fits, so, and this is amazing stuff. So to summarize it, because I want to be able to pivot into our business conversation, and you can help me with the summarization, because I looked at from a tactical perspective, people being able to take time and slow down for themselves. This is especially now, because if you're in relationship, to be able to reconnect to that person or reconnect to yourself. Mm-hmm. I always look at it that way as well. It's like, okay, can I connect back to myself and then repair the relationship to myself? Because I know on the inside here, that's the biggest critic that I have more than anybody else out here. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of people out there. So it's, and repairing that. So if you want to add to that, but that's what I took from that piece.
And to even be able to identify, do you know when you are connected to yourself? What does being connected to yourself feel like? Right? Because that might be new to some people, right? Like, I've never been connected to myself. I don't know what that is, right? So just to even be curious as to when I'm connected to myself, how do I feel? And some of the signs can be you feel grounded, you feel patient, you feel peaceful, you feel spacious, curiosity comes back online, right? You feel calm. So there's a certain way that your nervous system just calms down when you're re-entering your relationship with yourself. And so when you reestablish this safety inside yourself, then you're able to actually reach and want to repair with a partner and saying, you know something, I think that we could have handled this in a different way. Or I would have appreciated if we could have done this in a different way. And then it is an invitation, right? Because it's not as if every partner is going to be on the same page. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, would you want to try this with me? Would you want to try to reconnect and explore, is there a different way for us to have had this conversation? Can we speak from I statements, speaking from how I feel and what I need? And can you share with me how you feel and how you need? And what you need, as a way to create just greater safety, just to be yourself. And that begins to create some space, especially during these times that are so stressful and uncertain. And so the relationship piece becomes really, really, really important. And now awesome. Talk about business.
No, I'm gonna put a period on that. And for those of you who are listening now, definitely save this video, because this is, and these are just pearls of wisdom on how to connect to yourself. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely incredible tools and I could talk about this for hours, and I'm going to come back and listen to this just so I can keep reminding myself, and I'm going to go talk to my son later today. All right. So let's talk about business. Okay. So you've actually run, owned, operated a facility like Pain Arthritis Relief Center when you were in Florida. And so you've been through the struggles and the joys of owning a business. You own your own practice. You just know how to operate and run. So, and now we've worked together from a business capacity as well. And it helped transform the way that I am as a leader and who I became to lead my tribe, so that they could feel safe as employees. And they're my number one, they're my internal clients. I look at my employees as the most important people to me as a CEO and an owner of this business. So yeah.
If I could reverse the interview for just 2 seconds,
sure.
What's helpful to you about our work together that helped to transform your business?
That's a great question. I think if there's anything I could, be human first. It's not about the product. It's about just being human first. Good morning. How are you? Nice to see you. Not about just to go outside of myself. And this business, and realizing, and I learned this through working with you in the business capacity, it's not just about what's important to me and my silent partner, which is my business, right? But that has to be held in one hand at all times, and then also humanity. It's like caring for a person and understanding that everybody has their own life and their own husband and their own wife and their own children and their own stuff. So I have to make sure that when I'm communicating with an employee about the importance of the business, I have to take their safety and understanding into consideration first.
Mm-hmm.
That, as well as what we created together, was an entire interviewing process and a hiring process, which is really cool. So I learned how to read body language, eye contact, energy, so to speak, to be able to sharpen up our ability to hire and recruit people. So we can go into we won't go into the detail, but that was extremely impactful. So.
And so where I would like to kind of shuck and jive with you, because I love our conversation, is this is a point that is concerning to me, which is the reentry of the workforce into the 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
After this COVID-19 pandemic, and how business owners, as much as the world, I believe, has this expectation that once it's done, we're just going to kind of like flip a light switch and we're just going to resume life as normal.
Yeah.
And that for me is really concerning, because I believe that business owners are going to hit a huge brick wall in terms of knowing how to deal with the disparity between what the expectations of productivity is that was happening before this pandemic and where people are going to find themselves now, right? There's going to be a delta in terms of not only adjustment, but what people are bringing forth, because each person's experience in this period of quarantine has been immensely different. Each person's financial situation is immensely different. Each person's capacity to deal with stress is immensely different. And each person's trauma history is unique to their own emotional fingerprint, per se. And so where I think it's really important to at least name is that businesses will need the support to know not only how to identify, but how to create a space where employees can feel heard and supported, and at the same time continue to be productive, right? It is the duality, as you mentioned before. It's the capacity to hold these two things, right? Like, you still need to be able to do your job, and you still need to be able to be focused and accomplish goals. And there's a lot to hold, and there's a lot that has happened, and there's a lot that's even outside of people's awareness to even begin to talk about. So if I could just name a few things, right? Like,
please. Yeah. Cause, well, real quick, just, that, okay, let's get productive. Let's do it how we used to do it. Like that part to me is like easy, but I know I'm going to be met that way. Like if I just come in and say, okay, we're going right back to normal, because it isn't. Things have shifted. It's totally different. So yes, please, like what for the business owners out there and people getting back in the real world, like what the hell can we do? Like how are we going to approach this?
So this is the part that I think is important to name, because there is not only this expectation of like, let's get back to normal, but the majority of people have this way of operating that if I just ignore what is happening, it will go away, right? Like let's just barrel through this. And
like an ostrich.
If we just barrel through this period, we're going to make it, and we're going to be in a better place, right? So, and the part that is so ironic is that the barreling through, let's say, coping strategy is traumatizing in and of itself. Right? Like one of the hallmarks of trauma is we're going to pretend what is happening isn't happening. Right? Like, oh, so let's say my dad gets drunk at night and he passes out in the living room. The whole family is just going to dance around this drunken man on the couch. And we're going to
as if he wasn't there. Yeah.
As if he wasn't there. Right?
Yeah.
Like that dynamic is very prevalent of trauma. And so businesses, because they do not know how to deal with this, will more than likely operate from the same paradigm without even knowing that they're doing it, right? Because
without hiring you to come in and retool my whole business. How am I going to do this, Olga?
Well, the first piece is really important to acknowledge that this space exists, right? Like that piece is really important. And so there's different levels, because there is the global level in terms of all of your staff, and then there's individual levels in terms of like how each person is performing, right? So it is important to have a way to assess and to have a finger on the pulse in terms of how are my employees doing? Like what is, and you can name it. I don't necessarily.
When you say how are they doing, you mean like how are they feeling versus not on the productivity side of things, because those metrics are easy.
Well, no, yes and no. So whichever one is most easily accessible. That's what I was going to say. I don't know exactly how to call it, because it's not necessarily that it's just the focus on how they're doing emotionally. You can use the metrics of productivity actually as a flag, right? Like if somebody isn't not only producing, but keeping up with whatever work needs to be done, or if there are balls being dropped, right? Then that is a warning sign that something here is not right. Right? That this is a flag to say, okay, what needs to be addressed from an individual perspective? What is happening, right? So usually signs of trauma are lack of focus, lack of motivation, inability to finish things, inability to ask for help is a huge part of trauma. So what happens is that employees begin to hide, right? Like they're struggling, but they don't want to get caught. So, or they don't want to admit that they're having a hard time because they don't want to lose their jobs, right? So what we are talking about here today is how to get on the front end of that, so you don't have to suffer with the aftermath of however many weeks or months this employee has been hiding, not doing stuff. And then as a business owner, you come to find out 2 months down the road, why has this not been addressed?
Like
right?
you pick up the carpet and it's real dirty underneath.
First, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraging you to pick up the carpet first.
Now, before we get started again.
Do it now.
Got
right?
it.
What are the metrics that you're going to put in place to assess that? Productivity could be one thing, right? And then also connection. Are your employees present when you greet them? Do they say hello to you back?
Wow.
Is there some robustness in their greeting? Do they look at you in the eyes? Is there a smile? Right? Like sometimes there's like flat affect. Now, I'm not talking about like a Disney-esque way of, always being on, but I'm talking about the sense
engagement.
That
they're there.
Yes. Yes, that you can feel their presence.
Yep.
Right? Using your own senses is actually a great way of measuring how your employees are doing. And so there's the individual piece, but there's also like a group and a collective. And is there time from a collective perspective to share where each person is in terms of how has this affected them? What are they bringing to work? What would they like to leave behind, right? And to have very clear conversations to delineate how is each employee functioning at their self at best and their self at worst. And so when we begin to reveal our capacity to function self at best and self at worst, and we share it with a group, it actually helps the group to help us hold each other accountable. Right? And so then we begin to undo what caused the trauma in the first place, which is this feeling of being alone.
That's right? Awesome. Undoing aloneness is your magic.
Is undoing aloneness while helping the person gain awareness as to what is happening on the inside. Now, these are very simple, basic conversations.
I'm like, as you're giving this stuff to me, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do when these people come back from unemployment. I'm starting to feel myself get scared on the inside. I'm like, shit, how am I going to deal with this? I'm going to have meetings but that's
if
what I
you
do.
break it down into smaller pieces, it doesn't have to be anything huge, and it doesn't have to be anything monumental. But I think that it's important, at least that when your employees re-enter the workforce, or not only re-enter the workforce, but re-enter your work environment, for you to be proactive in naming that they are re-entering as different people as than when they left.
As am I a different person than when this started?
Absolutely. right?
Awesome.
And so to be able to name that there has been an impact and to create space for that impact will create a tremendous difference, not only in the level of productivity, but in the level of loyalty and trust that your employees will feel towards you, because you will show that you care about them probably more than they care about themselves.
Yeah,
That's
that's,
huge.
this is super, super powerful gems. I don't want to go too much more into this because I'm going to request that we do this more. And I want to do another one that's specifically
Yeah.
on business, and we'll get something scheduled for sure, because I think this is so relevant to all of our friends and colleagues who own businesses and how we're going to deal with this, because it's something that cannot be overlooked. We can't approach this the exact same way, like, oh yeah, it's fine, we had a day off. This is totally, people have shared with me, oh, in 2008, when the market crashed, uh, I owned a business then. I remember in this area, you weren't here at this time when the snipers were around. That was a terrifying, traumatizing time, but it's not even close to what's occurring right now. So are there some summarized nuggets? Because I'm trying to just be in a place of listening and receiving versus I'm not able to intellectualize that conversation as well, because I'm part of it. I'm like feeling into it as I'm there. Is there anything as a summary you can leave us business owners or people even for both sides, like reentering the workforce and business owners as well? Can you leave us with a couple nuggets before we say goodbye?
Sure.
Okay.
One, I do think that if you and I meet again, it would be more of a like strategically focused kind of meeting, right? Like,
Perfect.
what are specific strategies that business can implement, like step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of a thing.
Got it.
I really like really clear steps. So just kind of like as a summary in terms of what we touched based on today is about doing two things. One, what is your mechanism for tracking? And then what is your mechanism for connection? And if you can have those two pieces really clearly delineated, your business will thrive. Those two things. And connection does not mean that you're going to be your employee's therapist, but it means that you create a space where connection is something that is vitally important and it's revisited on a regular basis.
Awesome. And I definitely, working with you for the business side, if I could have to put one word in it, is connection. And that's it. But those of you business owners who are listening, have no fear, because my entrepreneurial brain is already kicking in the back. So this is definitely gonna become well, let's see here. I'm just gonna show you, because this is for you guys. This is what we do. This is what we do. So we're definitely Olga and I will continue to work together. We're gonna put some strategies together for our business owner friends and clients to be able to, one, have a tracking mechanism for connection, and a tracking mechanism for, sorry, what was the
No, so the thing is to have the tracking part is tracking in terms of productivity.
Got it.
Right? In terms of presence, in terms of what are the mile markers to look for, right? So you don't have to get hit with a surprise of people not being present or not being engaged, or just kind of muddling through the reentry process. The reentry process, in my opinion, needs to be something that feels really welcoming and safe, and actually needs to be celebrated, because the unique part of this that can actually be capitalized upon is the enthusiasm that people will have in leaving their homes.
Yeah.
And that energy is an opportunity, and it's a window that needs to be capitalized in terms of gaining momentum. And if you are a strategic business owner that can tap into the enthusiasm of people returning to work by embracing where they are and how valued they are in the workforce, that is going to make a tremendous difference in terms of how your business will recover from this.
Awesome. I'm putting my winning pose up because you are amazing. Thank you. I love you. You're awesome. Such wisdom. For those of you who are listening, please comment below, and 100% we will have more coming at you. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for sharing. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.